Hello. I wanted to talk about something, and that is more or less um, how many videos have you seen that declare some sort of verdict on it? This doesn't work. That doesn't work. I mean, it's is. I mean, it's to me, it's sort of like okay that I'm sort of like you know the dude going, well, that's just your opinion, man. But really, what is it with this? What is it with people going, oh, you know, the wheel of time fails because it's woke, or this was a complete. Let me tell you something about half the stuff that's being celebrated as cult favorites on the on YouTube. The stuff that gets brought up as oh, look at this brilliant thing somebody did. Half the time, when I used to see these things I'm old enough. Uh, I'm old enough to remember a time when the TV guides were fairly thick, and they always had movie um, listings in the back, with star ratings, and it's like how many of those movies that had 1 star ratings or that were critically shellacked or were box office bombs, how many of those are now considered classics? I mean, it's not always true. A lot of the big blockbuster earners were genuinely good films, but it's sort of a bit of wishful thinking to think that everything that matches um it's sort of, I don't know. It's sort of wishful thinking to think that everything that we dismiss, or I mean, because a lot of what we see, a lot of what we experience, there's a very heavy dollop of marketing, going on behind that. And so we get hyped up for something, and very often the thing we get hyped up for that, spends, maybe a weekend at the number one in the box office is something that we forget about. And I mean, let's take an excellent example, Fight Club. I have the actual honor of having seen that film in the cinema. I saw it, back in college. I think it was at the Galaxy Theater in Waco, and it was a brilliant satire, which unfortunately, years later, people still don't get an important part of that satire, and very often it's the people who most resemble the space monkeys and the Project Mayhem folks. Yeah, and that's a real shame because it's sort of, we all have these conformities that we kind of get caught up in. We all kind of get caught up in sort of um, these wave of political pushes that are much like I mean, I've seen it happen again and again. That you have this leader. who one set of people just, they go all out, you know, bashing that leader. But once they take their eye off of that leader, once that leader's conduct is left to determine how people view that leader, um, the opinion changes. Their idea of that person changes because they're no longer they're no longer being constantly bombarded with this purposeful sort of um, harsh, sort of negative hype, you could say. It's it's very much a thing of people are using the same sort of marketing principles they use to hype films and other products to essentially attack other people, attack other kinds of films. And this encourages a kind of, I'm objective, and these are, these folks are, too woke, or these folks are, or alternatively, you could have, there are times where I look at what the left does, some people on the left, where it's just basically critiquing and policing, the content of other shows to the point where, well, uh, people can barely be creative at all, and you kind of lose the intermix of stuff from other cultures because to a certain extent, you look at the way, say, the Japanese treat our culture, treat our sort of. I mean, just watch how they deal with Christianity. There are some times where they kind of get it in very off the wall. Um, Particularly in Helsing is a good example. You know, but there is a temptation to declare this is how this works. To declare this is how film can work. But how it does work. But the thing about it is, and if you look at it enough, you'll realize that film is like any other kind of communication, especially narrative film. There is a certain degree to which you have a there are some things we universally share, aesthetically speaking. Um, Things that tend to work a certain way, like a dolly's in. It's a very disorienting shot, so it's used a lot for for representing disorientation in a character. Um, if we want to show somebody kind of subtly tailing somebody else, we'll often use a long lens, a telephoto lens, and get that sort of on top of it, sort of compressed sort of sense of space, of z-axis space. If we're trying to make somebody seem more lost in the crowd, well, we might portray them with a wide angle lens and kind of just find different little ways of indicating, oh, there he is now. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that it is not a set, rigid kind of language. Cinematic language and storytelling in general is kind of an on the fly sort of agreement between the writer, the filmmaker, and the audience. And so a lot of what the film means depends on who is interpreting what the film means. It's not that there's no role for the filmmaker in kind of narrowing the possibilities of interpretation. Quite the that's quite wrong. The better way to put it is, it's a question of, can you get the audience to can you negotiate with that audience a certain interpretation? And if you can, then whatever you've been doing works. And this is the thing. I mean, you must have watched some sort of action extravaganza at some point that was just terminally stupid on most levels. But the action itself redeems that stupidity. You just, enjoy you have a great time watching it because the kinetic flow of the fight scene is and the choreography is just so, you know, just so enjoyable, and it means something. I mean, this is the thing we need to realize with genres and everything is that genre is just basically an ad hoc sort of category, and they change over time. Some genres are about elements of the story. Some genres are about elements of the plot. You know, you can do a science fiction movie that's a mystery. You can do a realistic movie that is a metaphysical, you know, meditation on life. If it can make that interesting, some, and that's sort of the thing. One problem is a lot of the people who manage the upper echelons of the movie industry are kind of, that they're corporate folks from other businesses, and they look at it with a paradigm that's about repeatability. Okay, this succeeded, so we're going to do this, and this. Um, then um, you have folks who try to make it into a formula. If we put that in, that will make it work. Um, I mean, you get so many rules, so many arbitrary rules about what you can do. When I was much younger, there were grave doubts as to whether you could have a successful series with a non-white lead. There were a whole lot of things about. I mean, when I was a kid, um, women very often ended up, damsels in distress. Uh, there was the female grab area. You know, even if you had a strong female character, the strength of the female character would be taken away the um, so that the man could shine. so the man could, win the day. And it's sort of like um, the, things in life. I think tend to evolve, you know, inchwise. Sort of, you get something like, okay, before they were just damsels in distress, flat, they were all just, feminine archetypes, the wife, the girlfriend, da 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 da. Uh, then you had, you know, a then you had, okay, we're going to allow the woman to be strong, but then the strength of the woman will be taken away at some point. And then you have finally, you have a situation where the woman is allowed to win. The woman is allowed to break themselves out of their predicament and not merely serve as something to glorify the lead male character with. And it's sort of like, I wonder how many times people said, "Oh, we can't do this because it wouldn't appeal to these people and these people and these people." And I wonder the how many times the material succeeded in spite of all they said couldn't be done. You know, because a lot of what people try and determine to be to work or not work is yeah, a lot of what people determine to work or not work is based largely on how, how they were raised, how they were brought up, what generation they are. I'm pretty sure that if you're of more of the greatest generation or the silent generation that follows, that your attitudes would probably be more along the lines of, okay, we're going to have her either be a full damsel in distress or a token, badass woman who nonetheless has to be rescued at the end. Um, and on the other side of things, you have the more the boomers, and then more the millennials. You have people who grew up with things like Buffy the Vampire Slayer, which, despite all the trouble on set, I'm sure that many who watched that show, saw every day a competent, kick ass female lead who didn't need to be perpetually bailed out by her male counterpart. And then you sort of have, I mean, what becomes acceptable, I think, kind of varies as time goes on, which tells us that really all this sort of objective, you know, it has to be this way, it has to be that way, this has to happen this far into the film, and da 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 da. Now, what you can end up doing is perhaps doing these things so often that it becomes the expected thing, and people just don't know what to do with it when they see it done otherwise. But coming back to today, I mean, it's I see people going after the Wheel of Time for one because of the way they kind of diversified the cast, And once you start down that road of, oh, they're just making it woke, and they're forgetting that the characters in that story were all already demographically diverse. That the idea of women being the dominant magical force, that was pretty radical for you know early 90s, um, late 90s fantasy. That's pretty radical. That really, that was a big difference, from the older stuff, which was patterned on Tolkien and all that, where there's hard, there are just a few named or speaking characters in that work that are female, and we're having to, we're dealing with. I mean, part of the issue is we have somewhat immortal franchises, somewhat immortal book series. When I was a kid, girls in my school had to wear dresses. That was part of the dress code. Uh, yeah, you couldn't show up in pants or shorts. They could do that when they're playing at home, but showing up to school, you had to show up, but you had to have you have to have a dress. You know, and it's like it's. I should stop saying so much. You get a kind of we are we're sort of patterns woven in time, and we don't quite realize it. We don't quite realize that the world is slowly but surely passing us by. Slowly but surely, a new generations are being born whose brains booted up by themselves, and they're looking at the world that we had to learn about, and they're learning their way into that world in a way we learned into our sort of world before it. So where people like me, video games grew up with us. They went from being blocky 8-bit animations like on the Atari or the original Nintendo system to being, by the time we graduate high school, you're having things like the N64, the pretty soon GameCube, um, the PS2, the PS3. You start getting sort of changes in what their original experience of video games is. So, when I was a kid, video games were kind of they were very much looked down upon. And now they often have bigger budgets and bigger sales figures than any of the movies out there. They're considered an art form now. They're they occupy a huge space in the economy of um, of things. And it's not just that not everything's gone 3D. Folks have gone deliberately back to 2D. That's more like the 16-bit video gaming that we that my generation kind of grew up on. the when I was 12, they came out, or around 12, they came out with uh, the let's see, this the Super Nintendo. They came out with the Super Nintendo, and that was, that just made that just made the RPGs, for example, gorgeous. You had all these details, all these great looking sprites, and stereo sound. You could have the shift from side to side. Mine was the generation that first played the you know GoldenEye on the Nintendo 64. We remember, and the point I'm trying to make here is, I mean, it's like people talk about bad CGI nowadays. Well, you know what? I remember back in the time where if you wanted to tell at the point where things started going in some sort of fantastical direction, it'd be like, okay, suddenly this character becomes a stop motion figure and they're, ding. That would be our sign that something had gone up. We would have obvious optical effects. There'd be, I mean, we talk about bad CGI nowadays because we're spoiled by modern computer generated effects. Um, and when we think, oh, it was so much better in the days of optical effects, uh, but no, no, things look. There's always been a this looks fake level of special effects. It's just they had different signs, different weaknesses and strengths, and so context changes. People are back, wanting more in terms of practical effects. And it's not all bad. It's not all bad because you get a situation where, I mean, sometimes it's just not the right decision to go CG. Sometimes it's more expensive. It, unless you do it perfectly, it takes people out of what they're watching. I mean, I don't always have that many problems with it myself, but it affects judgment of it affects the assessment of many people when they see a story. But that's another thing I would like to offer a perspective on, and that is, what is the real problem? I mean, the thing about it is, whatever kind of story you're dealing with, it's BS. It's not true. It is an elaborate lie. And I think that's something people just need to keep in mind. Because we were getting to a point in this society where we are assigning a lot more of the attributes of reality to stuff we see in the of reality, of consistency. We keep on saying, oh, you have to do this in a way that respects, that obeys canon. You know what the word canon comes from? The word canon comes from the list of acceptable. Um, See this? I don't want to Donald Trump it here. Um, this is a NR, NRSV copy of the Bible. I got this in college for my New Testament course. Um, and you look at this, and there are, I mean, you look at all the books, you got Genesis to there's a certain number of books that are asserted to be the yes, ending with, for some, it ends with Malachi. That's where the Old Testament ends for many people. And then you have the apocryphal or deuterocanonical books. And that's everything from the book of Tobit all the way to 4 Maccabees. That, and then we go. I mean, it's amazing how much of. I mean, we think of the Bible very much in terms of the New Testament, but this is about right here. That is the canonical New Testament, and that's the Gospel according to Matthew, all the way to the Revelation to John. And let me get the official name here. There we go. Yeah, the Revelation to John. That's what it's called. This is what is canon. You want some fairly odd reading? Read some of the stuff that didn't make the cut. You know, the Gnostic Gospels, the all the different Gospels. You know, they cut down to just 4, but there are way more than just those. You know, you have the I think Proto-Evangelium of John or something like that, of James. You know, you have a lot of stuff that didn't make the cut. That is, and what did make the cut, that is what we call canon. And of course, we have, with many shows, we have the Bible for that show, which is, of course, the word Bible. It comes from the word for, I think, what is it, Greek? That's biblios. You know, it comes from the word for book. The Bible is the book. And so that is where we get the term canon. And that's why there's a lot of sort of authority invested in the word canon. You know, we talk about the Western canon being all the well-regarded works of literature. And that's part of what we're kind of fighting against at this point. Because you have that sort of attitude of okay, these are the acceptable works and these other works are not acceptable. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't have a consistent sort of, set of authorities on what is and is not true in your particular fictional world if you're if you're writing one, or that it's bad that a lot of showmakers and writers and others have that. But I think I want to counsel against the, I guess you could call it the idolatry of canon. The idea of, setting up this must be true in terms of fiction, especially when we get into adaptations. You look at the legend of King Arthur, and right off the bat, you have several versions, ranging from, you know, legendary material back, in the earlier in the millennium, all ranging all the way to more modern stuff like the I think the Idols of the King by Tennyson. I think, um, and you have sort of you have all kinds of different versions of what went on. Some which introduce elements that we now take to be obviously part of the canon. Things like, okay, who is who you know for example, how did Merlin come about? Who is Merlin? Um, and even today, we've got all kinds of different, you know, takes on the characters. But you got some people who think, okay, to do a serious take on King Arthur, for example, oh, we've got to do it real as it was in times past, and that to me reflects, I think, a limitation, an artificial sort of limitation. I mean, one of the there was a recent movie made. You may have heard of it. I think the Green Knight, and there was just something about that. The way they didn't apologize for the fact that this story had magic. They didn't apologize for the elements of the supernatural in it. They they did, make more mature uh, choices content wise, especially in one particular scene involving the lady at that house that he gets to towards the end, and it's like, but they even though it's not necessarily a perfect canonical make sort of story, there is a respect for, I think, the legendary aspect of it, the fact that it wasn't the part of the charm of the story. Part of the charm of the story was, that it had this sort of mythological thing going on underneath the surface. And it's not just, about going through the motions of mythology. I think it's not just that. I think that's a mistake to just Okay, we're going on the hero's journey. Da, 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 da. That kind of misses the point of what that hero's journey is about. It's about development. And that's sort of, we look at, new stuff like the Wheel of Time. We look at new stuff like, it's sort of like people are, some people are up in arms that it's not made exactly like the that it's not made exactly like the books. The question is, if you made it exactly like the books, would it be exactly like the books? Here's the thing. We talk about all storytelling, at least fictional storytelling, being about reconstruction, being about, okay, I'm going to tell you these things, and your imagination fills in the rest. So if I tell you there was a Joe or John or Jeff or whoever walks into a room and there's a beautiful lady, and I say nothing else, well, are you at a loss to be able to imagine a beautiful lady? Or if, say, you're, you know, did, if we're talking Jill, Jeanette, Jane, you walk into a room and there's a handsome man. Or you can do, sort of mix and match with that. You know, this one character, the male character walks in, sees a handsome man there. The woman walks in, sees a beautiful woman in there. But whatever way you're doing it, whatever way you're doing it, let me ask, how does that man or woman look? What image pops into your mind when I say a beautiful woman or a handsome man? I mean, we can define features. We can certainly give you kind of more of a sense of what the character looks like. Maybe the guy or girl is blonde. Well, what kind of blonde? Well, if I say blonde, that could be anything from having somewhat, reddish or golden hair to just being flat white, platinum blonde. So if I were to say just platinum blonde, you'd get one idea. If I were to say strawberry blonde, that might lead you down a different course. If I say he was 6 feet tall, that's, you might have an idea of what 6 feet tall looks like. Or I could say he's tall. And depending on what culture you might be from, or what the average heights in your area might be. I mean, for some cultures, 5'6" might be pretty tall. I think that's what I think that's the height Goku has. Uh, and in some other cultures, I mean, you have. I think Jack Reacher from the books is 6'6", and there's an example I think of a character who's casting in the movies, despite him being, yeah, I kind of appreciated what Tom Cruise did with the character, but a lot of people couldn't see past that. They saw him in terms of being 6'6", but how many people are actually 6'6" and can act? That's one of the issues that we get into as we kind of pass into the discipline of filmmaking, storytelling and reconstruction in filmmaking. It's a different game because if I'm writing a book, I can get away with saying he was tall and blonde, and that might you, each one of you might have a different idea of what tall and blonde is, um, of what handsome is, what features kind of do it for you, or what features you would judge to be good looking, regardless of your orientation. But if we're doing a movie, if we're doing a live action movie in particular, then well, you could say in quantum physics terms, the wave function has to collapse. It can't be this indeterminate reconstruction. We have to construct, okay, this is what this person looks like. This is, you know, our Rand is, he's a skinny looking guy. He's he's kind of, and you look at, I mean, I'm looking at the book here. I mean, um, right here, this guy. I mean, is that Randall Thor? Well, if you look at all kinds of different you know portraits of him throughout the book series, I mean, they did this one set of they had uh, these original cover art. So let me see who did the cover art for this. Uh, Cover art by Daryl Sweet. But they went for a different artist in later editions of the book, particularly the ebooks that I completed the series with. And I think those are some pretty good looking drawings. But they're very different from the character as he's been portrayed elsewhere in the original cover art. But if you're doing a movie, you have to decide who you're, or at the very least, if you're doing an animated show, you have to decide, what does this character look like? What do we kind of go with? And then you have to have then you're kind of constructing how does this character behave. But it's some people might go and take things a bit literally and go, oh, it's just important that we have this, da, 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 da. Yeah, they want them to say all the things they did in the book. They want to do all the things they did in the book. And they think that if they get that, then the story will have succeeded. If they don't get that, then it's a failure. The problem is that you're reconstructing things in an entirely different manner when book as opposed to screen. Whether you do it animated, whether you do it live action, you are asking the audience to infer different things, reconstruct different things. I mean, the literalism of film and electronic media kind of leads people to want to look at it as if it's objective. But who, as somebody who's done a lot of writing, both prose and screenwriting, as somebody who's done a lot of, and I'm not saying I'm particularly good at it. I'm not saying I'm even published or have sold a screenplay at this point, but I I know the techniques. I know the formats, and I've completed works. So at least I have an understanding of what the challenges can be. Like, okay, I'm writing, I'm doing my outline, and I'm writing through. Okay, this, and this. I had this entire set of sequences in the book that I got finished writing not too long ago. I had this entire set of sequences that I had planned out, and it just suddenly occurred to me that there was absolutely no need for those sequences. They did nothing to move the story forward, and so all those just went away. And instead, I found some way of just cutting to the chase, cut of and it was a character based way of cutting to the chase. I figured something that my lead character would want to do, would be dying to do because he's seen so much wrong be done to certain people. And so he'd do something that would right that particular wrong, even if it, even if it, cost him dearly. And that's sort of that's sort of the thing about it. When you have a, you reconstruct things a certain way, and there's some things you just don't need to be doing. I did a lot of my work from outlines. And so there was always this sort of three-act structure to it. There was the first act, second act. I sort of I tended to split them into two, and then there's the third act. And putting that story together that way, if I had the challenge of whittling it down to make it into a filmed story, I would have to do different things. Some things would be much easier to translate to screen. In fact, they'd probably look a lot better. Like a, a complex action scene. You know, I became very conscious of how difficult it is to write good action in prose. Pardon me. Um, but if I did that in a movie, it'd be as simple as, okay, we figure out a way to shoot this. Um, telling the character, there are whole sections in many books telling you what the characters are feeling, or at least hinting at what the characters might be feeling, what they might be planning or whatever. But if you're doing a if you're doing a dramatic sort of story, that gets reconstructed in a different manner. Rather than putting you in the character's head, you kind of sit, you observe the character from without. You observe the character by themselves, you know, or you observe the character visually. I mean, you're watching me right now, and you can see the way my features move, the way my voice and the pace of my voice, how it modulates up and down, the loudness of my tone. Um, these are ways you can kind of give the audience information on what's going on up here without resorting to the infamous sort of Dune 1984 sort of you know voiceover thoughts. You know, why does he want the Duke's son dead? That sort of thing. It could be as simple as having a character walk by and having having the emperor just ask that question. But here's the thing: you look There are all kinds of different ways to do these things. And what I would say is that's a good thing. I mean, we have something that's basically so complex that any set of rules you would put on it trying to hold it all in, any set of rules that you would impose would kind of fall apart sooner or later. I mean, you can analyze a fight scene, for example. Analyze, okay, in real life they wouldn't do this move because it would expose, this part of their body, or they would this it telegraphs it from a mile away. Um, an audience has to reconstruct what's going on in a particular scene. It's not just the priority isn't just doing things 100% accurately. There's a lot of there you the audience needs to be able to kind of follow the important points of what's going on, and that's part of what Denis Villeneuve did well with his Dune adaptation. He created something that the audience could follow and understand, as opposed to something that just simply hit the beats of the book. You know, and that I think is a critical thing to understand is that storytelling is not simply I present this truth to you. No, you're not presenting a truth to anybody. You are presenting very artful lies, which may have elements of the truth within them, because we sort of understand that the tales we tell have a truth hidden within them, a truth about people that we kind of bring out by kind of doing a simulation of reality, or doing a sort of a representation, a commentary on reality. And so you go and you make it you can do things like make it clear that somebody doesn't want to kill somebody else. Do you do it by just saying, oh, he doesn't, he doesn't want to kill? Well, it's a complex sort of thing, and it is our imaginations are as varied as we are. Our perspectives are as varied as we are, and yet there's a commonality embedded within that emerges from within, such that we can understand the ideas and motivations of people from different cultures often enough. Not always totally, but we can understand things about how other people think, how other people approach things. We can, figure out the meaning of their differences of opinion. But the long and the short of it is, it's not objective, and it's not about objectivity. Objective reality is out here all around us constantly, but we're doomed to have a very subjective impression of it. So we're doomed to have a very subjective impression of it. To see only certain things, to understand only certain things, and that's part, in fact, of how so many different meanings can arise. That it's not, you know, completely and utterly objective. It's not that it's bad to be objective sometimes, but we have to realize that objectivity is something that we struggle towards. It's not something we can naturally be. We are We have a point of view, we reconstruct the world a certain way, and the art and challenge of storytelling is trying to get a reconstruction that works for a vast majority of people. And what I think some critics need to realize or admit is that just because they don't like what they their imagination puts together, just because they don't particularly appreciate the changes that a story pulled together, doesn't mean that it didn't work. Doesn't mean that their verdict is infallible or objective. No, your perspective, your reconstruction is your own. Even with movies, movies are just more subtle, more sensory, more. They have you reconstruct from different materials. It's like carving a figure in wood as opposed to casting it in metal or shaping it in clay. All different things, all different ways of doing the reconstruction, all with different effects on the look of what it is that results. And so storytelling in cinema is like that. There are as many different styles possible as there are filmmakers. So I'd say take a step back. Take a step back and realize it's all BS anyways. There are certain ways in which it needs to be taken seriously and certain ways that it does not. And there are certain ways in which a person's opinion needs to be taken seriously about a work, and there are ways, plenty of ways, in which it does not. Thank you very much and have a good night.